Today in the spotlight is the Department of Justice. The DOJ was once seen as the gold standard of American law and order, the agency that people trusted to be fair and impartial, but that's just not the case anymore. Instead of respect, the DOJ is now met with fear and frustration and distrust. It's been weaponized not to serve justice, but to serve political agendas. Here to lay out the issue with us is Chris Bedford. He's our Blaze senior politics editor. So Chris, when it comes to deep state government corruption, we almost have to start with the DOJ, right? It wasn't always this way. So can you first at least take us back to a simpler time when the DOJ was a more honest department?
You know, gosh, it's hard. It's hard to think of a time in history where the DOJ wasn't political in some way, this way or that. If you read Richard Nixon's first book, Five Crises, the first one, which is the most interesting, is his story of how he uncovered Whittaker Chambers and brought him in to testify in the Alger Hiss trial about communists in the Department of State, high-ranking Soviet spies in the U.S. government. And he worked really hard to make sure that the FBI would not get a hold of that witness before he did, because he knew the FBI would simply bury it for the president. When a friend later on asked J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI, why did you spy on Barry Goldwater's campaign? He responded, well, when the president tells you to do something, you do it. There was a time after the Church Committee where they broke down U.S. intelligence, and the FBI has always been the worst offender of these, where they broke down U.S. intelligence and said, we expect you to be a law enforcement agency. This is the kind of DOJ that we grew up with, Silence of the Lambs, like they're hunting serial killers and rapists and they're freeing children. They're not involved with political domestic spying operations. Even that DOJ has got some kind of wild overreaches, whether it's Ruby Ridge or Waco, Texas. But what we see now, where the American people have lost trust, where these aren't just the concerns of the political and people who are watching closely, where the American people have lost trust, I think began in 9/11, where the Church Committee's rulings of the lack of spying were really pushed away. The DOJ changed dramatically to have to, and its intelligence arms, to be something that made enforcement and entrapment really important parts of its tactics in the United States. And what started with Islamic terror and was questioned only by a couple of libertarians and liberals turned out to actually expand pretty dramatically to Catholic churches. And these last couple of years, we've seen the steepest decline. I mean, when Donald Trump was elected president and the head of the FBI comes and briefs U.S. senators and U.S. people and says, we think there's a serious problem with Russian collusion, the idea is to believe it. Jeff Sessions believed it. Marco Rubio, whoever else, believed it. They said, wow, this must be really serious. The American people did too. But by the time, fast forward 4 years, they're raiding Mar-a-Lago. You have people like Marco Rubio, now Secretary of State, immediately recording cell phone videos on their back porch saying, this is wrong, this is overreach, because that credit that they had built up over those decades, like you talked about, was spent so dramatically. And I think they believe they are part of the resistance. I think they actually liked the smell of their own gas. And they thought that they were essential to taking down this evil threat. And they had to save liberal global world order from evil orange man. And because of that, just like the press and just like corporate America, which is starting to correct now, they lost all credibility.
Chris, I think that's such an important point to paint in the broad picture that nothing is new under the sun, and there is no such thing as a perfect era where there was no weaponization of government and everything was hunky-dory. Nonetheless, let me paint a picture of better times, and it might be idealized. I think it is somewhat to try to get more precisely at where and how things went wrong. So, I mean, first off, it's called the Department of Justice. At the heart of the American system is the idea of the rule of law, not of arbitrary individuals. And when you have the highest government, the federal government, has a system of laws, and those who prosecute the laws, and those who represent the government, the Supreme Court, this is all within the Department of Justice's pure purview. And, as a young, idealistic man who was brought as a child to Northern Virginia, whose father, my father, was working at the Justice Department under Ed Meese, a sort of legendary figure. I remember this as part of the soul of my American experience, is shaking his hand as he was walking down the halls, in those halls of justice, right? What it's literally called, and thinking, this guy is in charge of the entire thing, right? He's very kind to me. I was probably like 10 years old, and hi, and thinking, wow, that's amazing. And then coming there years later, and having studied some of this stuff and knowing people who worked there, seeing the actual tablets of law, Moses's tablets of law, all of these figures from throughout history in the Roman style, right? I mean, so it just strikes me like the very essence of American government is sort of tied in some way to the Department of Justice, a lofty title. Then even though there were these, scandals and Hoover and all kinds of, Ruby Ridge and all these sorts of things, there was still like some part of you that, at least for me, that tied America's essential goodness to the Department of Justice, because at the very end of the day, there were bureaucrats who were good, right? There were bureaucrats who they might have been Republican or Democrat. There might have been some shenanigans, but they really did see their job as tied to the office, tied to the rule of law, tied to the Department of Justice. That was what was in my naive head, but I think it represents a lot of heads in America, on the right anyway, until we reached 2016. And I remember being on a plane, leaving Washington, D.C., after realizing full well, oh no, we were spying on ourselves. The Department of Justice is thoroughly corrupt. This is very clearly, a lot of this is coming from there. And then a lot of the things you just talked about are revealed. The text messages, we're going to get rid of Trump. Don't worry, it's up to us to stop him and all this. If we zoom in on that change, it feels, is it naive to think like something essential changed? Was it always this way? And you mentioned 9/11. That certainly was part of it. Do you think there's something else that went on in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think you could probably trace it back to the Ivy League universities. If you look at the top of the Department of Justice, they all fit the pedigree. They're all Harvard, Princeton, Yale men, and that was always like that. I think it was originally the CIA, they said, was a Yale operation, essentially. That's how Bill Buckley got tied up into it and the rest of them. But when the Ivy Leagues really laid the groundwork for a lot of the radicalism that we see now, where the ideas of just clear, blind justice are no longer as important as the arc of history that bends toward whatever, and getting across these different ideas. The department, still in field offices across the country, you will find good, solid federal justice agents, whether they're from the FBI or wherever, the U.S. Marshals, wherever. You'll find people who are solid. In Washington, D.C., though, the people who were attracted to that power, the people who watched West Wing and thought, that looks like a cool show, I would like to be a part of that moral training, who came here, they came from a different thing. You also see a breakdown in standards that really started to happen. Look, remember when the FBI was kneeling in the streets before Black Lives Matter activists to apologize for their whiteness while these guys rioted? If you look at the pictures of that, that's not field agents. That's overweight, short-haired, college-educated women. It's not an impressive picture of law enforcement. They happen to be wearing a badge and body armor, but they're your classic substitute teacher liberal. That's who they are, and that's kind of the culture that built up in Washington, D.C. James Comey bought into it completely, and I think that rot really maybe started to spread under Barack Obama, where you started to get this cultural change in the DOJ and really prepare it for that complete and total rejection of Donald Trump. Because one thing about those Ivy Leagues is, while they have these lofty ideas that they think that they're trying to defend, they have a real scorn for a huge swath of the country that they consider backwards. They consider, deplorables. And that really started to show when they pushed back against Donald Trump.
Well, the culture in D.C., Chris, is a two-tiered justice system, right? You have the political elites that have one system of justice, and then the average Americans, right? But what does it look like when justice isn't blind? How do we function as a country when this is one of the things that was supposed to just be inherent, and it's now just completely gone off the rails?
I know. Well, political control of the DOJ was pretty standard until the reaction against Richard Nixon. And I think we started to see political control of the DOJ and meddling of the DOJ really come back under Barack Obama. And you see it in different prosecutions. I mean, as Chip Roy was pointing out, and the Daily Caller reported out, over 90% of FACE Act violations over the last 30 years have been against pro-lifers, not against the pro-abortion activists and vandals. That's kind of a crazy statistic. It shows that there's really a political consensus that just kind of spreads. But it's not always coming. It's just, we talked about this earlier this week. It's not like Lois Lerner picked up the phone and Barack Obama said, execute Order 66, stop giving nonprofit status to conservative organizations. It was just cultural. It was tolerated. It was understood. You're the good guys. You see these crazy things like, you're on the wrong side of history. Well, that is a really insidious statement. It basically says, we're the good guys, you're the Nazis. We're the good guys, you're the Ku Klux Klan. We're the good guys, you're the Christians. And that kind of culture just spreads and gives a moral righteousness to this sort of crackdown. And what you need to do to fix it, I think, is to bring back standards, bring back checks, bring back balances. I mean, a huge thing. And Matt Peterson used to teach a course on, or oversee a course on this at Claremont. A huge thing is we need to return to congressional oversight, and not just partisan. Democrats are mad and Republicans do something. Republicans are mad if Democrats do something. Congress itself, as opposed to simply partisan, ought to be united in its jealousy of its oversight powers against the executive. Ought to be willing to push back against the executive, no matter who's in charge there, and actually try to hold things to account and make sure that different departments, including justice, aren't going too far away from where they're supposed to be, as has happened.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things there that would just say quickly, without teaching a course, that is important is for Congress to do that is, and people in the audience need to understand this because it's counterintuitive. You think, well, I want term limits, right? I want small staffs, and that's a good thing, and it's not a good thing because the size of government and the power of the bureaucracy has grown while congressional staffing and employment of talented people has gone down quite a bit.
Triple the budget.
So you need Congress, people in Congress who have those smart committee members and lawyers who can help hold the bureaucracy in account instead of being creatures of the administrative state. But let's talk about Bondi a little bit more. You say checks and balances, because I mean what you're suggesting is, look, she needs to come in and there needs to be a complete culture change. So standards, and I think you're talking more of a culture change rather than anything legally or structurally, right? She needs to come in and say, no, this is our mission. This is what we do and how we do it. And then you'd have to implement, I guess, that across a wide variety of leaders throughout the DOJ, get rid of a bunch of people. And basically, it would be like a turnover in business, right? Where you're going to say, we're getting rid of the old regime.
She should do that. I think she should smash the left-wing NGO and terrorist supporting apparatus that's grown up around the country, supported by taxpayers and the Ford Foundation. I think she should take I hate it when Republicans come in and say, oh, this has been used as a weapon against us forever and ever. We're just going to put it and leave it on the table, and then you can come back in 4 to 8 or 12 years, pick it up and blow my head off. I think she should go after the Ford Foundation and say, why are you backing violent insurrections in different cities across the country? Why are you supporting terrorist-affiliated groups? Why are you supporting different organizations that neuter children? She should go after this massive left-wing money operation that's hijacked dead people's fortunes to use it against us. She should look at Soros and say, you're funding this person who frees these rapists. You're doing this. They should look at Hans Weiss and say, wow, it looks like there's a lot of evidence that you, at least from the woman on the record, that you beat, tortured, and raped her. Maybe we should look at you, mega donor Hans Weiss. I think that the Department of Justice, time for let's just go back to the 90s where there's occasional liberal atrocities committed against militiamen, is past. They ought to actually be rooting this out, getting rid of this DEI, firing the people that were kneeling down in front of rioters in the nation's capital, and take an active stance to try and actually go against those people who, for the last 8 years, have been attacking political rallies. Go after Antifa. Why can't you arrest people in Antifa? Are they smart? Go find the pipe bomber.
I mean,
where the heck is that person?
It drives me nuts. Like RICO, are you kidding me? Like organized racketeering? Like what is going on when you have an entire complex that supports the burning of the country down? We know exactly what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot. All those organizations and foundations would be investigated as being complicit in violence. I couldn't agree with you more. And you bring up this point about just corruption in general. If you really take the job seriously, and the American people have lost their trust in their institutions, what better way to regain that trust than to trust the Department of Justice, who's going after corruption night and day everywhere at the elite sectors of society where people usually get away with it. That makes a lot of point. You didn't even mention the Epstein list.
List.
I would throw that in there.
Figure out. Go to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, for goodness sake, it is so unbelievably corrupt.
It always is. And what are we going to do to actually go through and change it? I don't know. We're going to see what Pam Bondi can come in there and do. Donald Trump, he's on his, huge wave of executive orders right now. It really does seem like times are changing right now. Bedford, what can we look forward to with your Beltway brief tomorrow?
I've got some interesting and fun stuff coming in for you about the deep state's fight to try and tank Donald Trump's nominees. Anyone who threatens to upset the apple cart is in their sights.